Hello, everyone. It's so good to see you. Welcome to our special Q&A session. You all know who this is. He doesn't need any introduction. We have Sydney Plant Guy here today. Welcome.
Hello.
So glad to have you. And today we're going to be talking about moss poles. Everything about moss poles. All your questions. We'll get started. I'll throw the first one to you, Sydney Plant Guy.
Sure.
First one, how do you avoid overwatering the plant but keeping the moss pole moist?
Very good question, and it's probably a question I get the most, or one of the questions I get the most.
For sure.
Now, of course, the fundamental issue over here is that you're trying to keep your moss pole moist, and the moss pole has a much larger surface area than the actual pot, and it's gonna dry out much quicker than the actual potting medium. So first of all, I don't actually water the potting medium in itself. I only water the pole, and I just let any excess water drip out of the pole into the pot. So there's no need to water the potting medium on top of that, because that might actually cause overwatering issues. But I also make sure that I keep the potting medium very draining aerated. So I have a very chunky aeroid mix, so any water just freely drains out of the nursery pot into the planter. I'll just empty that out. So I'm not really worried about overwatering because I know that my potting medium is aerated and draining enough to overcompensate for anything like that. Another thing I actually do is over the years, I've kind of gotten to know my moss poles really. I kind of know how much water each moss pole takes. So I'm actually facing the opposite issue sometimes. I water the moss pole, but I only water the moss pole to keep the moss pole moist, not enough water to actually continue flowing through into the pot. So I've underwatered some of my plants because I just completely forgot to every now and then the potting medium.
Right. That's really interesting. But just to give this some context, what would be the problem with overwatering?
Most likely, we're worried about root rot. Right? So roots need oxygen. It's funny if you think about it, because if you propagate something in water, you'd think that there's absolutely no aeration while you pop something in water.
Yeah.
Water actually has a lot of oxygen. It's H2O. So there's a lot of oxygen in water.
Yeah.
That's why you this overwatering issue when you actually destroy something in water. What we are really referring to as overwatering and root rot is most likely a lack of aeration for the roots.
That's right.
Oxygen, meaning the roots are slowly going to die and they're going to get mushy, right? I mean, technically, root rot is caused by bacteria, but the lack of aeration and the, potentially sitting in water going to cause that bacteria to really thrive.
Yeah, that's right. I think that really needed to be explained, because it's not just the water. There's other things at play that you need to think about, and that aeroid mix is really just the sweet spot.
Yes, I mean, I know you're all about your Leca.
I'm all about the Leca, yes. But I do love a good aeroid mix.
I just feel like don't fix what's not broken. That aeroid mix has been working so well for me over the last few years, so I'm just going to run with it.
No, I mean, I remember back in the early days when you were still, oh my God, Sydney Plant Guy, and I would DM you and ask you about all these things, and that aeroid mix was absolutely super, and I remember I used that. So before I went to the Leca dark side, aeroid mix all the way. So someone wants to know, moss poles versus Leca poles. I use moss poles all the time. I'm part of the moss pole gang. I think sphagnum moss for me is the best thing to use in a pole. I have made a Leca pole before. It did not go so well. And the reason it didn't work is because you just can't keep the Leca balls moist when they're up there and they're exposed to the air, and it's a large surface area, and the Leca's just drying out so quickly. And unless you've got a pump and the water moving up and down and doing all sorts of things, I just could not keep that Leca moist. And if I couldn't keep the Leca moist, the area roots were not latching on and they were not growing. So I ditched that and went back to my moss poles.
I suppose we could expand that question a little bit and even talk about any sort of alternative materials for moss poles. I mean, for me personally, I really like moss, and again, don't fix what's not broken. It's working a treat for me, so why would I look at it?
That's right.
But I know that moss is not necessarily readily available in all countries, and or it's really expensive. So I'm being asked a lot for alternatives to moss. Really, the principle behind it is you just want to put a growing medium in your pole that you can keep moist, so that your plants can really root into it.
That's right.
So you could use aeroid mix, you could use just bark, you could use cocoa chunks, you could use leca, like any medium that you would normally use as a medium, a potting, you can technically put in a pole.
That's right.
But consider other things like how messy is it going to be. I've tried a cocoa chunk, like with cocoa chips, funky bits. They actually retain quite a bit of moisture if you compare to cocoa coir, but when you water it, the water just goes everywhere. So for me, in an indoor setting where my plants have gotten too large for me to actually take them to the bathtub or take them to the balcony and water them. So I need to be able to water my poles in exactly the spots that they are. And that sphagnum just has the beautiful capacity of just absorbing a lot of stuff quite quickly.
Yes.
So it's mess free.
Especially if you keep it moist and it doesn't get too dry.
Yes, I know that people complain a lot about moss poles drying out so quickly, but it's actually like a medium that doesn't dry out that quickly. If you would fill it with cocoa, orchid bark, leca, it would actually dry out much, much quicker.
Yeah, I know that. That is definitely true. Let's go back to the questions. How do you adapt watering your moss pole with a change of season and water demands?
It's not just a challenge over the seasons, it's a challenge on a day-to-day basis. So I know that I think Melbourne has had better weather over the last year or so than Sydney. We've had quite a lot of rain.
We haven't had as much rain as you guys.
Yeah, we've had so much rain. So I think the longest I've went without watering was 10 days.
Oh,
and that
wow.
was honestly, but that was like when it was flooding over here. We've had in 4 hours, we had the same amount of rain that we get on average in a year or something like that. It was ridiculous.
So that must have been because of the humidity then. It was just so humid.
Yeah. It was raining for 2-3 weeks straight. So the humidity was at 90%. It was just super humid. Plus, if it's raining the whole time, the sun was hardly out. So there wasn't much light, meaning the temperatures were quite low, meaning the plants weren't growing that much either, right? So these are all things that affect how much water a plant needs. I went up to 10 days without watering my poles, but then I
must have been a nice little holiday for you.
Sorry? Yeah, it was a bit of a holiday. Well, it was a bit of a holiday, but I'm still checking all the time.
Yeah, I
know. This is day 7. This can't be real, and it still is. But I've had times where I only had to water, every 2 days, right? It could be a really hot 35-degree day, 20% humidity out there, super sunny. The plants are thriving, pushing out a new leaf every week. So they're going to use a lot of water for that. So ultimately, it's not necessarily just a challenge that kicks in with the season, every 1st of September, now I switch to every 5 days. It's an ongoing challenge.
It is.
The way I deal with it is I just squeeze my moss poles and I judge whether or not I need to water my moss poles.
It's that sound, isn't it? It's that sound.
I got a crunchy one. Good. Because it's my watering day today, and so can you hear this?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So but the bottom part.
Oh, that's
nothing, right?
Yeah.
The bottom part is still moist, and that's where the plant is at. So I don't
it's fine.
This now. Obviously, the crunch is going to travel down.
Yeah. It's that crunch. I hate that crunch. Someone wants to know what supplies they need to actually make a moss pole.
Oh, controversial opinion.
Yes.
So, there are so many ways of making poles, right? It's really nice to see, actually. I remember when, I think we pretty much started probably at the same time around, is it 3 years ago now? I think almost 3 years ago.
No. When I started, I was looking up to you. So no, we did not start at the same time.
But yeah, I started around 3 years ago. And look, same with me. I was really inspired by Craig Milram on Instagram in his approach to growing plants, right? That's how everybody gets inspired. And he didn't invent it either.
Exactly.
Growing things on chemical support is something that people have done for centuries.
Yes.
Maybe not so much indoors with these aeroids taken completely out of their natural environment.
That's
but
right.
Overall, the idea of growing something vertically is actually as true to nature as we can be when we're talking about these climbing plants. So really anything will do, as long as it's vertical and it allows the plant to attach itself,
Yes.
then that is technically a pole. We're trying to mimic trees. So these plants in nature would crawl along the forest floor, and then they find a tree and then they start climbing up. Anything will do, right? And you could use a plank of wood, you could use...
You could indeed. And I've got, while you're on the subject, I've got that.
Yes, see, like anything will do really that is vertical, but there's obviously pros and cons of different types of poles and what you're using.
That's right.
I personally, in an indoor setting, think your vertical support should be a vertical extension of your pot. So if you just use a piece of wood, well, that's not a potting medium. Wood is not a potting medium,
No, it
right?
is not.
Yes, the plant will attach itself and is probably the closest to nature, but we're not growing in natural conditions. First of all, we are limited in height. We're growing in a pot, and we're not growing on the tree. We're growing indoors. So we're not aiming to be 100% close to nature because we already can't, right?
Yeah.
So we just want to supplement the conditions, or we want to use an approach that gets us as close as possible to what is possible in nature. So I think the pole being a vertical extension of your pot, so being filled with a potting medium, sphagnum moss, leca, cocoa chips, aeroid mix, bark, and so on.
Yeah.
That's really have the benefit of the plant being able to root into the pole.
Yes.
And then just really expanding that root system that it has available, so it can grow large and
That's
strong.
right.
And
So it's not just to add on to that one. So it's not just the plant attaching, as you say. So in theory, a plant could attach to a wall. It attaches to anything because it can. But what happens when it attaches? That's the thing. What are those roots doing when they attach? You want them to actually take advantage of that medium, which is where you're saying it's an extension of your pot. So the area roots go in there and they find food there, because if this plant was growing on a tree in the forest, it would actually have nutrition from that tree. There'd be rain, there'd be all sorts of things, and it's growing, whereas it attaches to a brick wall, there's nothing there.
I had a really interesting comment the other day, and there was something that I didn't even fully consider myself as well. You know, when we're talking it attaches to a tree, we're thinking about our average tree on the side of the road, right? But these trees in a rainforest condition aren't just a tree made out of bark. There's like all of these branches, and in between the branches, there's just a whole lot of debris like leaves and moss and all sorts of things.
It's a whole ecosystem.
Yes, so you actually have substrate growing outside of the floor, the forest floor, right? And so there are things that these roots in nature go and take nutrients from. I mean, bark also has a lot of nutrients, but they're not growing on your pine tree, you know, that you've got in your backyard. They're like a different type of tree over there. It's a whole ecosystem up there in the canopy where all of these climbing plants eventually grow into. So it makes total sense to give them a growing medium to attach to. So they're not anchoring and supporting it. They actually support the plants with water and nutrients.
Right. Okay. Now that we've said that, what do people need to actually make a moss pole? Because we're talking about moss poles here.
We're talking about the question, but we're kind of beating around the bush. So really, I mean, the most basic thing you need mesh, some sort of mesh or some sort of structural support, and then you need to find a medium that you fill it with.
Yes.
So I personally use a coated wire mesh, coated so it doesn't rust. You could also use galvanized, I think that's what it's called. I zip it together using zip ties, but technically you could also fiddle the metal pins around it. And then I just fill it with sphagnum moss. So really easy. I basically just use 2 ingredients and zip ties to hold it all together. But of course you can get super fancy. I mean, look, you can get as creative as you want. Like ultimately, of course you can improve on the good old fashioned moss pole over here. It's super basic, but I chose it to be super basic because it works for me.
It works.
And you can of course complicate all of it, but the principle behind it is always the same. You just want to have a vertical structure and then fill it with potting medium.
Keep it simple.
We both use the Grow Verticals that aren't just wire mesh to have the plastic backing.
But no, I don't use the Grow Verticals.
Now you make your own, do you?
I make my own, thank you very much. So that's that one there.
I mean, it's the same. They literally look the same. I mean,
well, they do.
It's just plastic.
They do. I like making my own because look at this one. This is a Burl Marks. and it's really thin, so I can adapt the pole to what I want. And that's the good thing about making your own poles, isn't it? You can adapt it.
Yeah, 100%. Look, I think there is so many ways of creating a pole. As long as the principles are there, it's structurally sound, it's vertical, and it gives your plant something to root into, then you're going to be set. So, there is no one approach that you have to follow. There is no one approach that's superior over others.
We'll move away from moss poles for a second because someone wants to talk about planks. And they say, have you ever used a plank?
I have.
You have? Oh. How did that go?
Well, not well. Well, it wasn't like a proper plank like the one that you showed. It was more like one of these iron bar.
Oh, right, yep.
So it's actually like bark, so it looks a little bit nicer.
Oh, I would love one of those.
Yeah, I've got some spares because I'm not using them anymore. So if you haven't seen me, come pick them up. I mean, they're nice. Look, they're nice. And obviously they're pretty close to what plants would grow up in nature. And it makes sense, right? I think I would highly recommend it for somebody who is not necessarily trying to increase leaf size. Maybe for somebody who really hates the look of moss poles. If you really hate it, I think that's a good alternative.
Yeah.
And it's probably for somebody who's not really planning on propagating their leaves either. Now, maybe a little bit of a story time with SPG.
Yeah.
So I really hate these wooden planks because I've had like really bad experiences with them. So I had my Monstera albo when I first got it. I popped it on like that iron bark pole and it climbed up and it looked beautiful. And the roots were really digging into these little gaps in that iron bark, right? It was really happy and it was growing and then it reached the top of the pole, right? Now, it's a piece of wood. It's not really, you can't just stack them on top of each other that easily because they're also quite heavy. So I actually thought, you know what, let's actually chop it into little bits. Variegated elbows as a good way to swap and maybe expand my collection a little bit more. That was still early days for me. Now I have way too many plants. Please stop. I have too many. Anyway, I cut them all, but because every single node was rooted into the iron bark, it didn't really come off. Like me trying to rip the roots off. I just ripped all of the roots. These roots then ultimately ended up rotting because, well, half of it was just
still on the bark.
Yeah, the rot then spread into the cuttings. So I think out of maybe 8 cuttings, I lost 3 and 2 reverted all to green. So I was like pissed off. I know that wouldn't have happened if I would have grown it on a moss pole. Because by the time I take the moss pole, first of all, I wouldn't have to take the moss pole apart. I would just stack another one on top.
Exactly.
But even if I want to take it apart and cut it in single node cuttings, each node actually has created a proper root system with water roots because it's grown into the moss pole. So if you're ever planning on chopping your moss poles, extending your moss pole, extending your moss poles, if you want to grow this plant to maturity, you need height, meaning you need to go through a couple of chops at least. Then I think planks aren't really a good option because you don't have the propagation benefits. But if you just want to grow that plant up a plank, go for it.
That was a scary story. We'll move away from that scary story because this person actually wanted to know if when you're using a plank, do you have to use acrylic or some protection around the plank to make sure that it doesn't rot?
I didn't. I think iron bark is supposed to be fairly rot resistant.
Yeah.
It's not though. I can tell you it wasn't. It was definitely rotting as well, but not rot to the extent that it would turn into an issue for the plant.
But you had that in soil as well, didn't you?
Yes, in my normal aeroid mix. So yeah, of course, with everything organic is eventually going to break down.
I've got this one here. I've got it in Leca. And when I put it, because I knew I was going to put it in Leca, and it's literally going to be sitting in the nutrient solution, I thought, I have to do something to just protect that plank because it is going to rot. I mean, you can't put wood in water and not protect it. So I just got some waterproofing thing from Bunnings and I painted that and away I go. I've only had it for a few months, so I've got no idea what's going to happen, but I think that is better than nothing.
Yeah, for sure. But my recommendation would definitely, if you waterproof the plank, only do the bottom part that's actually submerged in your pot.
Oh yeah, no, that's yes, that's
Yeah, which you've done, right? You only done the bottom part. Yeah.
Yeah, I did
if
only
you
the bottom
put
part,
the
and I
whole
just
thing,
came up a little bit because I
the
wasn't
roof-
quite sure if I needed to change the pot at some stage. So I've got that covered, trying to think ahead. But yeah, just, and then also you don't want
yes.
your plank to be looking grey. It's just going to look a bit weird. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
that's-
I'm also aesthetic, like from an aesthetic perspective, I think they look super odd.
They do. You've just got this random plank in your house.
Yeah, which also not like it defeats the purpose. The whole idea about using wood to me is to make it look as close to nature as possible.
Yeah.
But if we're then using one of these, like to me, that looks like it's supposed to be manufactured into a bed head.
It is. You're so mean. You're so mean. Look at me. Oh, come on. It's got my lovely.
Me, I'm just saying, like, that is just my opinion.
It's got my lovely cryptantha on it.
I mean, look, once the plant has taken over and covers the whole thing, then it's gonna look good. But I mean, people don't like the look of my moss poles. I'm so used to it by now. I don't mind the look of them anymore. So it's totally fine if you prefer the look of.
Tell me who doesn't like the look of your moss poles, and I will go find them.
They want to see the plant. They don't want to see the moss pole. And of course, it looks a bit weird.
But you can't have the plant until it completely covers the pole.
Typically at the beginning, you might only have like a little bit of leaves and like a lot of empty moss pole over here. But it's okay. I'm like you. I have like a long-term vision in mind. I know what I want this plant to look like in half a year's time, and I'm setting it up for success right now. But
exactly.
Aesthetics are very personal to all of us, right? Like if something doesn't work for your aesthetic, then don't do it.
Exactly. You can do what you like.
Wasn't the Sydney plant guy amazing? He is such a hoot. I did not know he was so funny. We've got more questions and answers ready for you, so just click on this video and go and see episode 2. Your question might be answered there.